Yeah, can you hear me clearly? Small room, so I think I should be audible, but yeah. So thank you everyone who has joined in today and also the speakers who have taken out the time for this discussion here. And just to lay the context in a very brief manner, by 2050 we are expected as a world to produce 70% more food and feed close to 10 billion people. The way agricultural supply chains are today working, they are not highly efficient, especially if you look at factors related to inclusivity. Smallholder farmers, women, marginalized communities often do not have access to the services they need to produce at their best. Agricultural supply chains are not sustainable. They are responsible for 70% of freshwater withdrawal. It is expected that 90% of the world's soil will see some level of degradation by 2050. Agriculture also contributes to around 1/3 of global emissions. Even in terms of, let's say, efficiency, post-harvest losses are a big problem in agriculture in India. In perishables, we often see that as high as 40% of the produce is wasted after harvest. So we see these evident challenges around inclusivity, sustainability, and efficiency of agricultural supply chains today, with climate change being a big factor that's playing in. And with all of this, food production has to increase by 2050 to feed 10 million people. Now, as a response to this, there's a lot of optimism, at least I think till last year there was a lot of optimism that technologies and digital technologies will be able to solve some of these challenges and help supply chains become more inclusive, sustainable, and efficient. With that, I think the key focus of today's panel will be to see how agricultural technologies and specifically digital technologies can foster rural prosperity. And we'll also try to understand what are some of the roadblocks and solutions to overcome these roadblocks and actually scale the use of agricultural technologies for smallholder farmers. Luckily, today's panel, we have people who have a lot of experience both on the field and at the ecosystem level. And with that, I'll start off today's discussion with a first question that I'll position to Hemendra ji. Hemendra ji just came into the panel. He had a long train, but just made it in time. Sorry that I'm burdening you with a question as we
Absolutely no
start,
issue.
but you'll be one of the best people to answer this. So Hemendra ji has been a mentor to several agricultural technology startups. He's also been a thought leader in the space. He's also worked on the funding side of the agricultural technology ecosystem. So Hemendra ji, from your experience across these different areas of work, what do you think are two or three of the most promising use cases of technology in agriculture that are coming up, digital technology that I mean, and uh, would, which, according to you, would be suitable for transforming agriculture in an inclusive and a sustainable way? The most promising use cases.
Great. Thanks, Shreejit, and thanks everyone. Good afternoon. First of all, good to see an dedicated agri track in this conference. So to answer your question, thankfully there are a bunch of technologies which are available now. Mostly, if you talk digital, mostly driven by startups, I would say, in last 10, 15 years. But fantastic set of tech available in the market. Frankly, it's hard to pick two or three because there are many. But yeah, if you push me to pick some of them, I think first of all probably remote sensing, which can capture a lot of data through Earth observation, like farm boundaries, crop signatures, yield estimation. And interestingly, the biggest use case of remote sensing so far has been in financing, farmer financing, because with the data you can build credit scores of farms and build a lot of data which can help banks underwrite without necessarily going to the field, and also help them monitor those assets, which is and when we talk remote sensing, we're talking scale. You can capture millions and millions of hectares, at a very high resolution. So I think that's fantastic. We have already seen some bit of sort of lending happening using these tech, and I'm sure I can talk about other digital stacks which are coming on the basis of remote sensing technologies that are available in the market. Second, I can pick soil testing. I think again, few dozen startups in the country using either spectroscopy or some chemical-based testing. Interestingly, all this tech is portable and affordable, which is very critical. Although we have a thousands of soil testing lab. The challenge is farmer is not going to this lab because this is inaccessible, the data is not accurate, data is not timely. Thankfully, all this tech gives you timely, accurate data at an affordable cost. So if you have that data, you can optimize your fertilizer usage. You can, take care of all the nutritional deficiency. And as we all know, the Indian soil is not in great health. So I think this is another transformative tech, I would say, which is there. Another could be, I think, tech to detect pest and predict pest attacks. So that kind of uses data coming from weather stations, even mobile images. If you process those images, you can figure out the pest attack and the kind of pest and advise farmers what pesticides to use and things like that. So I think I can go on and on, but I would probably say these are some of the tech which has already made some inroads. Farmers are adopting it. But I would also sort of caution you, if you look at solution from a farmer perspective, only digital won't work. So there has to be some physical tech, and I'm also big fan of microprocessing, micro storage, which is largely physical. But I think that kind of upgrades farmer from a producer to a processor. If you really talk about increasing farm incomes, I don't think it's about productivity gains, etc. It's about, can you make him partner in the value chain, and that's where the microprocessing tech becomes very, very critical. So I'll pause here.
Thank you, Hemendra ji. So remote sensing, soil testing, and pest prediction come out as some top use cases in the digital space. And like sir rightly said, it's not only about digital, but we need physical infrastructure as well, because that's where actually the value added happens. Thank you for these words, and we'll go a little deeper into these in the following sections. I'll now look at Dr. Amarender ji. He has worked extensively in the bioeconomy for agricultural space, and he has seen the agricultural technology realm evolve as well. So I would like to ask you, Dr. Amarender, how have you seen the technology landscape in agriculture change in India over, let's say, the last 5 to 7 years? And have you seen some success stories where technology has been transformative, especially for rural contexts?
Thank you. Good afternoon to all. If you see historical perspective, you see 2005, the MG Narega started. It's all rural works, mostly related to agriculture, pump ponds, etc. Most of that time, it's only physical. But over the years, 2005 to 2025, in between 2010 onwards, there is a adoption of digital tools, GS mapping and all these things. Now the progress is you across 6 lakh villages in India, and all these say some 10 crore the workers. We can easily identify which worker is working now, when they have started, as on today. Today, how many people are working, what work they are doing, what wages they are receiving, everything is digitized. That evolution takes place. Of course, for most of the agriculture technologies, since last 10 years is coming, but 20 years back this is this. And similarly, you see Jandan Yojana. This is again 2014 it is introduced. Last 10 years, significant changes. This Jandan Yojana and the MG Narega technologies, GPS mapping and all these things, they are all applicable now in the whether startup or agriculture, whatever the field. And for example, Prime Minister Fasal Bima Yojana, as sir mentioned, we are using satellite imagery, we are using ground truthing, we are doing multiple technologies to serve the farmers, to identify where the losses, crop losses are there, how to quantify them within a time framework. Within 15 days of crop loss, we are able to disburse claims to the farmers across India. Those type of technologies are there. Even e-crop, some state governments are introduced, Andhra Pradesh government introduced e-crop. So as soon as farmers sow the seed, that everything is tracked from the beginning to the end of harvesting, and whatever the services, because if you go to any village, there are some 20 schemes going on at each village related to agriculture, related to crops. All these 20 schemes are digitized, and based on their crop, who is beneficiary, how much they require for fertilizer, pesticide or soil health card, whatever it is. They are linking all these schemes, and one-stop solution in the form of digital solution, e-crop, that is happening. There are many examples. For example, PM Kisan. PM Kisan, 2 crores farmers are already digitized, data is digitized, Aadhaar linked bank account, and it is also timely. Of course, soil health card. But in agriculture, most of the schemes, there are some learnings, but we cannot depend 100% on the digital platforms, because most of the agricultural activities are physical in nature. We have to link with physical infrastructure locally, local retailers, local dealers, and also local agriculture officers, because they are the backbone. How we can link digital platform with the local agriculture officers, local retailers, local seed vendors, and how we can evolve a ecosystem so that they will give right advisory services, right inputs to the farmers, so that it will align with the government of India's objective of doubling farmers' income. So in that direction, everybody, private sector, public sector, or local stakeholders, state government, central government, all should be in one platform, and they have to serve the farmers. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Amarender. And critical point which comes up from what he said is that traditionally everyone has been looking at technologies as something that farmers use and farmers will use. And the question always is, will farmers adopt such technologies? But Dr. Amarender has highlighted that technology is also for other stakeholders in the agricultural ecosystem, like GovTech, government technology, and that can actually enable agricultural prosperity and rural prosperity. So we need to think about technologies that go beyond farmers but also help the agricultural sector as a whole. Very quick response I will also try to seek from Morup here, who leads AgriTech at IFFCO Kisan. Morup, you have worked a lot with farmers on the ground. If you had to talk about 2 use cases that you see farmers demand a lot, which are some of the use cases that farmers are interested in from your experience in this space?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Shreejit. So I think what are the farmers looking at from a technology perspective is, of course, they seek more from a value proposition. No, so something like a good market rate, something like a good weather data point, which will, or based on which we can do some sort of actionability. And a lot of farmers these days, I've been observing that many of who are a little advanced, they are going for automations and everything. So that's something that is that's a piece looking at. And I think if I just want to add potential-wise, if you see the 2 technologies as Hemendra just mentioned, remote sensing and IoT, these 2 combination of these 2 going to be really changing, game changing. The only change that I believe that must happen is remote sensing insights that are available right now are more suited to the sponsors, donors, or government and everyone, not to the farmers. For example, remote sensing technology tells you exactly what crop you are growing, what is the yield and everything, which may not be very significant from a farmer's perspective. Even if you're talking about a yield improvement in yield and everything, that's so less significant that willingness of farmers to pay or something is not going to be much. If any technology, the same remote sensing technology, can now talk about how can one enhance their active ingredient, which is exactly what the buyer is looking at. And if you're actually able to connect the 2, it means more business for them. So I believe, likewise, as you said, pest and disease, insights and forewarnings. Another amazing thing, the irony is that the actionability on top of it is not there. Okay, you can forewarn certain things, or this is a problem and something, but how to make it actionable? Like today, if you look at the D2C commerce in urban areas, why is it not only actionable, not only information and actionable as well? You can get everything in 10 minutes, but the same thing does not happen. Even if you're able to forewarn certain things, you cannot act on it as a farmer. So it doesn't really serve the purpose. So I believe the combination of these 3 technologies, building an ecosystem around it, can really be a game changer. Farmer is seeking, they are not specifically mentioning technology A, B, and C because they're not aware of it. As I said, it's the value they're trying to seek, and value from a market perspective, something which will help them fetch better markets, something which will help them understand when to sow the seed, when to harvest, and exactly and make it a better proposition. As I said, third part, I think that I believe that very little less intervention is happening is market, and again connected to market. If you look at the technology stack, mostly is happening either in the production side or the post-production side. There's very little innovation, almost no innovation happening in the middle side, which is exactly where these two value chains are intersecting, right? So talked about many other government initiatives such as ENAM and all. Uh, what is the visibility that we're talking about from a farmer's perspective? The most powerful thing that has just come, even just come now on a platform like Enam is that you can now do price discovery and and that too not for all the transactions. So we are far behind from that perspective. What I'm trying to tell you is that technology value proposition definitely are sought by farmers, whether on the production side or on the market side, but those are not enough. They're not actionable enough for the farmers to really benefit as of now.
Thank you, Morup. So one thing also that I picked up from what you said is that, yes, technology and use cases, it's good to segment it that way, but at the end, it has to be value proposition for farmers. And sometimes for that, you'll need end-to-end integration at all stages and not only in the production and the post-production phases, in the middle phase as well. With AgriTech also creating value, I think over the last 2 to 3 years, we have seen several research which has demonstrated that at scale, AgriTech can create value for smallholder farmers. One of the programs that we did in Telangana actually showed that farmer incomes increased by around 18% by when they were supported with 4 types of technologies. These were chili farmers in Telangana. So there is potential, there is evidence that's coming up on the potential of technology for agriculture. But still, there are gaps which limit adoption and active usage of such technologies. Some of these gaps are at the ecosystem level, some are at the farm level. So at this point, I would like to turn to Yuvraj, who is with the IFC, and he's been leading several agri-tech programs across India to understand a little bit about ecosystems for agriculture. So when you go to different states in India, what are some of the gaps that you see which prevent adoption and people from deriving the full value of agri-tech? And as an organization, what are you doing, or what are some of the ways in which these gaps can be filled?
Thank you, Shreejit. Firstly, thank you for having me here. Namaste to everybody. I think the number one observation that I have made personally, based on working with all these AgTechs and working with some of the stalwarts like Hemendra sitting here, is there is a lack of access to discovery of these AgTechs. In other words, the farmer, not just the farmer, even the government is not aware of what are the solutions out there in the market which can help address some of these critical constraints. I will give you a few examples. So we are working in a few states across India, and what we do is we sort of convene relevant AgTechs and the government. And we've seen some tremendous results in Uttar Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh, but when we started off, it was almost a hesitant approach from the government कि क्या है, क्या करेंगे, क्या इनके solutions हैं, कैसे farmer adopt करेगा. And I think it all boils down to what Morup said. If you are showing value proposition, if there is any enterprise in India which is showing value proposition, the farmer will come after you. You don't have to sort of push your product to the farmer. The farmer will come to you and ask for your product. This we've seen across India. If you have demonstrated the value of your product on the field, there is a saying, oh, खरबूजे को देखकर खरबूजा रंग बदलता है. हमारे इंडिया में एग्रीकल्चर में वही चलता है. If you can show value proposition, the farmer will buy you. So that is number one. Access to sort of discovery of these AgTechs. What are these relevant acts? Number two, I think the biggest pocket in the room, especially in agriculture, is the government. So you cannot ignore the government. And a big challenge, as I see, is that the government and private sector AgTech collaboration is not mainstreamed. So what I mean to say, I'll put it in an example, is that, for example, if I am, let's say, there is this AgTech called S4S. Hemendra talked about micro processing centers and adding value at the farm level. So what S4S does, it sort of installs these solar installations and helps the farmers process their produce and buys it back from them. They've been avoided the earth short price. इन्होंने बहुत अच्छा काम महाराष्ट्र में भी करा है. But when we brought them to UP, we were surprised. We had to literally work for a year with the horticulture department to just figure out which scheme they fit into. Eventually, they fit into the MIDH. But this is a real life example of how even the top AgTechs of our country are not yet mainstreamed in, forget about implementation, just at the conceptual level, at the directorate or with the government, to understand which scheme they fit into. And unless you fit them into a scheme, the farmers will not adopt them. So, I mean, I can talk about other challenges, but to me, these are the top two challenges. One is access to discovery of these AgTechs, and second is mainstreaming them and their partnerships with government schemes and projects and the government overall.
Thank you, Yuvraj, and that's a interesting example. So, in order to build the government capacities, just a follow-up question here. So, you explained that you make or you develop convenings where the government can meet agri-tech startups. So, generally, do you also believe that farmers should be a part of these convenings? Like, how does the message then flow to the farmers, and how do you build the awareness at the farmer level? Is it?
Look,
Yeah.
the good part in the last few years, and because I've been with the World Bank for some time now, and I've been working with AgTechs more or less, not directly, but one thing that I've observed is in the last 4-5 years, we've got more Indian solutions. पहले क्या होता था कि we had solutions, but you know, you had these drip solutions which were sometimes imported technologies, so to speak. But now, slowly, with the new crop, we are seeing the Indianization of these technologies. So, and one more thing we've realized working very closely with these AgTechs is they understand their market very well. So, उनको पता है उनके किसान को क्या चाहिए. So, they are well represented, the farmers, through these businesses. And just for context, both Hemendra and I, we sort of work together on this India AgTech Advisory Project of the IFC, where we work with different state governments to help them boost the AgTech ecosystem and actually ground some of these AgTechs through a democratic process on the ground. And we've seen good results in the last few years. We've seen more than 100,000 acres diversified with market linkages through an AgTech called Gram Unnati. We've seen, I talked about S4S, we've seen S4S starting implementation in UP. We also heard remote sensing. The project supported the government of UP to put together the first of its kind state-owned remote sensing system, which is monitoring 21 crops at a real-time basis. So, I think all these initiatives are very important, more so because, you know, there will always be, at least now there is, and there has been, a trust deficit when it comes to the government and the private sector. There is a certain hesitation that, you know, the private sector say, hey, how do we partner with them? So, if there is an interlocutor such as an IFC or a World Bank or even a World Economic Forum for that matter, you guys are also doing good work. So, what happens is that trust deficit is mitigated to a certain extent. The government feels a little more comfortable. They will make sure the vetting is there, the IDD is there. So, I think that role is critical, at least at this juncture where the whole ecosystem is sort of growing at a very rapid pace.
Thank you for highlighting that. And I think just to add to this, there is a trust deficit between the private sector and the government, often also a trust deficit between the farmers and the private sector. So like an intermediary or someone who understands all stakeholders is necessary. And thanks for highlighting the role of a neutral stakeholder that's thinking best for all parties. Before moving into some practical recommendations on scaling agri-tech and adoption and active use, I'll just want to hear from Morup again from a farmer perspective. When you take a technology to the farm, what are like your top 2 challenges that you encounter that you have to think about, strategize, and overcome before farmers actually start adopting and actively using technology?
Yeah, great question. So, one thing, as I said, farmer may not be spelling out those technologies, but it's the value again. And 2 critical values that they seek is in the production side, how can they enhance their productivity, and how can they sell it at a better pricing is what they seek. And any technology, whether you call it a IoT, remote sensing, everything, the challenge that we find is that, you know, everything that we add, it looks like a cost. It looks like already the cost of production is going up, and you add a technology that makes it look even more costlier. Now, how to come up with a model, how to engage, come up with a different ecosystem of sorts where every stakeholder understands it, and within the value chain, these cost of technologies can be absorbed and generate value for each and every stakeholder. A simple example that I would like to quote is roughly the experiments that we have done. What we understood is, if you really look at the combination of tech, if you come up technology and on-ground implementation, a hybrid ecosystem of some sort, if you can implement it, uh, uh, and you have a complete buyback from a farm, from an agribusiness. You go there, exactly spell out your requirement, and ensure that okay, you get a buyback from them, and you work it backwards rather than a production-driven system. You go for a demand-driven system. What you understand is that the engagement or these tech stack and the combination of hybrid ecosystem is roughly around 2 to 3% of the total cost of the buyback. I mean, that's something that you can do, which is hardly you're talking about 1 or 2 rupees more than the procurement system, per kg procurement bar. If you're able to absorb that cost, how can you absorb it? The way you can absorb is that after utilizing those technologies, if you can generate enough of value in the overall ecosystem for the buyer, you can actually fetch it back, not just absorb the cost, but you can earn more than that. I think that's the kind of thing which is missing in the industry, right? So that doesn't mean that a lot of good things are not happening, but everything is happening in silos. So we need a convergent system. We need an ecosystem where all these things can be built across. We're not even talking about the add-on benefits that a lot of people are talking about, carbon credits, water credits, et cetera, et cetera. And a good chunk of side streams is something that has not been encashed enough, right? So I think there's enough of business there, but all we require is that common platform where every stakeholder is on the same page. And as Yuvraj mentioned, the transparency and traceability is something that is completely missing. If you're able to establish that, you're good to go. So I think that's the biggest challenge right now. Every technology they introduce, they'll say it's a cost. How are they going to? And they're actually right. Unless you make them earn better, unless you make them, decrease their cost, it doesn't add up.
Thanks, Morup. So addressing the problem of cost, I think what you said rightly translates to, rather than asking will the farmer pay for the technology, we should be thinking about who in the supply chain will pay for the technology most. So thank you for highlighting that. We'll move to the section on recommendations. We'll try to get a few actionable recommendations from the panel here on scaling the adoption and active use of technology. I'll start with Dr. Amarender ji. You have worked on policy. You have supported documents that actually support policy. So according to you, if you had to make 1 or 2 policy level changes or recommend 1 or 2 policy level changes for scaling digital technology, what would those be?
Actually, when we are talking about agriculture, we are talking about the poorest of the poor society, farmers. 80%, 90% of the farmers are small and marginal. They are poor on any parameter. So, under these circumstances, if we want any private companies or startups, the economic viability is a big question mark. Government has to support in many different ways. Economic viability gap funding. There are so many ways government has to fund, because all other developed countries also they are doing. That is number one. Another thing is that now the government of India, for example, soil health card scheme, organic agriculture, natural farming. There are so many different schemes going on, and about 20, 30 schemes are going on. They are using very uniform guidelines, procedures, but Indian agriculture is very much diversified. Punjab farmers are totally different from Bihar farmers. Their incomes are 10 times more than the Bihar farmers' incomes. So how to tackle this diversity? And farmers' problems are too much different one place to other. So problem-driven solutions are very important, because, for example, I am telling soil health card. We are imposing the solution from top to the Punjab farmer or Bihar farmer. Rather than that, we have to bottom-up approach we have to use, and start with the problem, diagnose the problem properly, understand the problem, dissect the problem, and develop some small prototype which is tested and valid for scaling up within that particular geography, not across India, maybe within that small agroecological system. If we identify that prototype and if we scale up by involving not only agriculture but the private sector, NGOs, other nowadays farmer producer organizations are coming up, cooperatives are coming up, all the stakeholders, even startups. This ecosystem we have to develop, local solutions, local problems, local solutions, and widening the scale of people who are involved in this. entire things. That is very, very important. Then only we will get some, some solid results. Otherwise, what is happening? We are implementing many schemes, but on ground, the applicability, the usefulness of those schemes are not there, and wherever these, most of the farmers are not able to get the proper benefits. And now this technological revolution is very fantastic, whether it's a biotech technology, whether IT or artificial intelligence. For example, farmer, message, farmers need basically the advisory services. And for these advisory services, now we are using ChatGPT. So whatever we want information, we'll get it. Similarly, we develop some, vernacular languages, this type of, at least advisory services, which are very, very tailor-made to the farmers' local needs. That's the biggest opportunity which we are having now, that is the big opportunity for the startups, especially at local level startups. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Amarender. Yuvraj, I'll look at you for your recommendations also in scaling agricultural technologies. Top two which you can think would be disruptive.
I'll try to keep it brief and to two. So one is, I think, very pertinent point made by Dr. Reddy. We live in a diverse sort of landscape. We have 14 agro-ecological zones, and even within those, you have varieties. So what will work in Bundelkhand will not or may not work in Purvanchal, or what will work in Punjab may not work in Rajasthan. So to have ground level demonstrations of some of these technologies where the farmer can touch and feel and actually see the benefits. So the experiment does not need to happen on the farmer. So I think that is very important, to ground these technologies with the government, and that is something that we are also trying to do through our IFC project. So that is at the farmer level. Second is, because we are also at the India Digital Summit, to create DPIs, some of these governance systems. We mentioned remote sensing, which is I think a very, very critical use case and application, which I think eventually will have to scale up across all states, because you cannot keep on relying on untimely and inaccurate data to make these heavy decisions based on these massive budgets that are dispersed in agriculture. And another sort of idea on the DPI, or another recommendation, would be creating these platforms where AgTechs can be integrated to reach a large number of farmers. This is something that we are also trying to do in collaboration with Google and the government of UP. We're calling it the Open Network for Agriculture, where we are integrating relevant solutions across the value chain, starting from advisory to storage, to mechanization, to credit, to markets, and seeing how a large number of these AgTechs can cater to a large number of farmers using agri data to provide customized services. So these would be my two simple recommendations.
Thank you, Yuvraj. From a private sector perspective, Morup, what should the private sector do differently to scale the, let's say, valuable use of AgriTech for farmers, create value for them? What are your one or two recommendations for this?
Yeah, so I think the first recommendation would be to really bring research to the market. So a strong market orientation of the researchers, especially in the government side. I don't know how to do it, but if that happens, I think that's going to be really significant. And the second part, I would really say that can we have an alternate value chain which is focused on qualification and not just quantification. By that, what I mean to say is that the transaction happens not only on per kg basis, but based on the quality of the produce. So a lot of times, what we understood is that on the buyer side, if we speak to their willingness to pay for the farmers for quality produce is already there. Why are they not paying? Because there is a complete lack of traceability, transparency, and more importantly, a trust factor, which is completely lacking in the conventional value chain. So now, every agri-tech solutions that we're talking about, if you're trying in that conventional value chain, it is not resulting into that impact that it should be, and is not scaling up. And thus, having an alternate ecosystem where many of this, an organization can have their own ecosystem, right from, as I said, from a soil testing to remote sensing to all kinds of technology stack that we've been talking about, and establish that traceability and transparency within the value chain, and and get a demand-driven sort of a thing going on. Establish what exactly is required from the buyer side. For example, a sugarcane company is actually looking for higher sucrose value. Can the technology be worked upon enhancing that and then ensure that the buyback happens, and thus they make more business, and the same thing can be passed on back. A potato guy, can you ensure the starch will actually go aside through the remote sensing technology to stack? Likewise, those kind of propositions can be made, and I know, and ensuring that even if you aim at, let's say from this value chain perspective, even if you aim at 2 to 5% of the total GVA that we talk about from a conventional value chain that is going on, we're still talking about a significant amount of transactions, significant contribution to the GDP of from this industry, which is not happening for long. And importantly, what it does is that it spreads the cost, the money, the total money the additional money that we are generating back to the farmers, to other stakeholders as well. And then we continue on building on the next set of AI, next set of technology that we talk about. Right now, because of the various challenges, the technological solutions are developed, but because of the operational challenges, they're not able to grow. I think this is where we need a separate, completely dedicated ecosystem. So even if in an ENAM of sort, if you have a sustainable agricultural value chain, which is completely ensuring that all these components are insured, even if they do 2 to 5%, we're talking about significant amount of time, I think, amount of transaction. So that'll be my, yeah.
Thank you, Morup. And we'll close this panel with the last question to Hemendra ji. And sir, what will be your final word in terms, if you had to change one or two things in the AgriTech ecosystem, what would those two things be? Let's more than one. It's okay.
No, I think a lot has been already said, but okay. Yeah, so if I have to, again, if you have to drive adoption of this technology at scale, I think there are 4 A's that we have to address from a farmer perspective. First is awareness of these technologies. Why farmer is glued to a YouTube or an Insta, just because they find them useful. They find a lot of new things out there. Second is accessibility. How do you make sure that whatever we talked about soil testing, we talked about pest surveillance, how do you make it accessible to farmers, especially small and marginal farmers? Third is affordability. There are a lot of Israeli tech and US tech and European tech which has come to India, but the reason they are not able to crack it because they're very expensive. So when we talk about India, it has to be affordable. And the last is aspirational. How do we make this technology aspirational for farmers? And that's not going to happen unless the farm economics work. They save money, they earn money, they de-risk farming. I think that demonstration is key. So I think to me, these 4 A's have to be solved. Now, who's going to solve it? So again, I would say there are 3 or 4 actors. First, as Yuvraj also mentioned, and I think everyone corroborated, is government. And I think government, we should be very clear. There's a central government, there's a state government. We shouldn't club it together when it comes to agriculture. And we have had our own experiences dealing with both of them. Though there is I would say, there's a lot of action happening at both the levels, and thankfully government is working like a startup when it comes to agriculture. But essentially, government's role in building both physical and digital infrastructure. When I say physical, as we discussed, the microprocessing, the micro warehouse, the rural infrastructure, rural roads, expressways, all this is very critical to connect Bharat with India. So I think that is where government comes in. And when it talks about digital stacks, I think data collection, data storage, data authentication, to me is largely responsibility of the government. Private sector can make it more efficient how to do it, but the ownership remains with the government. And to me, the utility of this stack is probably 10-15% unless we open source it. So I think that is another big challenge and opportunity that we have. How do we go about open sourcing the data stack where government has to come up with a framework? And again, I think private sector has to play a role. I think second big actor to me, which is not talked about often, is big tech. And you got mentioned about Google. Why I'm saying big tech, likes of Google or Microsoft or Cisco's of the world, because they understand scale, which probably a lot of us don't. So I think we need to bring a scale perspective when it comes to agri-tech. We shouldn't be talking millions and lakhs. We should be always, there's opportunities in billions in whatever we pick up. So how do we bring that mindset? And that's where we need to make big tech inclusive somehow. They're still sitting on periphery, in my opinion. Some of them, like Google, for example, is trying to get in, and I'm sure others are thinking about it. I think third is I will club startups and investors together. Startups, all said and done, I think they are hustlers. They do things which most of us thought is never possible. They have the audacity to write their own script, which is so critical in agriculture, because you have to look at agriculture from a very different lens, and that's where innovators, startups become very, very critical. We thankfully have 6,000 startups. We can potentially have 10, 20, 15,000. There's hardly any scope of monopolization of this sector. So how do we, take not just the number higher, but make them scalable, profitable, sustainable? I think that is where the opportunity is, And I think investors, of course, thankfully we have many more investors than what we had 10 years back. There are a lot of mainstream capital, foreign capital coming into it. But all said and done, all AgriTech put together has raised $3.5 billion, probably less than what Swiggy or Zomato have raised, And to me, disruption doesn't happen in a country like India unless we raise 30, 40, 50 billion dollar. You look at SaaS, you look at fintech, you look at e-com. All these sectors got, that scale and, that visibility and that respect and route to IPO when they hit those kind of numbers. So we have to lot to catch up when it comes to agri-tech, and that's where again government has to play a role, because to me investment in public by government will make private capital more and more attractive. Right? So I think that's where, and lastly, I think people sitting on this dais, Sutradhars, whether World Economic Forum, IFC, World Bank, ThinkAg, all of us have to play a role to connect the dots and also involve other players like FPOs, NGOs, R&D institutions. There's so many agri-universities. Why research is not coming out? I'm sure the kind of, the pipeline startups are built. We have distribution channels which can have built the access to the farmers. But those molecules, those hybrid seeds, those technologies still sitting somewhere in universities. So how do we involve them? So I think there are multiple actors, and I think the convergence, alignment, and as rightly pointed out by you also, there's so much of distrust. Forget government, startup. I think there's so much of distrust even within private sector. We are all writing our own playbook. So I think there has to be some bit of alignment to make the real impact.
Thank you so much. We are closing the panel, but before that, any questions like we can take? Probably, can we take 2 questions?
My name is Aanchal. I've worked in the sustainability space, and currently I have my own startup, and it is in the agri space. And I think all of you mentioned that, especially in agri space, there's a huge element of phygital, more tilted towards physical. And taking from what Mr. Mathur said, just in terms of funding, the trend that I see, having entered this space pretty recently, is that scalability and investors are very tilted just towards the tech part, and not so much, there is not an understanding that in the agri space it has to be phygital as well. So as someone, really wanting to and has an idea, is not able to sort of move ahead just because the funding ecosystem, is not able to understand, for lack of a better word, how different it is from a fintech or any other,
Actually, a comment on Hemendra, sir. Any thoughts on how we can maneuver this? The investors are looking for scale, fast growth, whereas agriculture is more of a volume game, and getting to that volume of servable customers takes time. So, should this be a change that investors make, or should it be something that agriculture companies make in their pitches?
My frustration is same as yours. I won't deny that. I've talked with almost all the investors. Educating them about agri-tech is difficult. They see more risk than reward, frankly. I think, but one good thing which has happened during pandemic, the digital adoption has gone to another level, right? And one thing most investors have realized, even if it can't grow at the scale at which a fintech can grow, the downside is also limited. The consumption of food, which is not going to go down, in the pandemic, the only sector which grew was agriculture, right? So I think that uh, that is the realization. That's why we saw at least couple of $1 billion flowing during pandemic. But yet to sustain their interest, someone who's looking at 50 business plans every day and AgriTech being like one or two of them, we have to have some role models. We have to demonstrate some returns and exits, etc. So I think which is a question of, to me, another 2, 3, 4 years. I'm very hopeful at least 3 IPOs in next 3 years or 4 years demonstrate 20-30% IRRs for the investors who have come in early. So I think that, and of course I think at the policy level again we have to build more consistent policies. Investors are also worried. कल को MSP लग गया या कल को some regulation changes and their investment goes for a toss. So I think as a policy maker, as government, we have to also make sure that this sector, which is probably more politically sensitive than others, though fintech also got a lot of, RBI has gone after them, and you see what's happening. The arbitrage, regulatory arbitrage is completely gone out of the window. So I think we have to be sensitive as policymakers that these policies have to be consistent, and we give them comfort that you can get a decent exit even if not in 5 years, 10 years. And I think entrepreneurs like you have to. I think I see a lot of opportunity. It's a sector which needs patience, which is probably more than many other sectors. At least in scale. Yeah, I think in terms of exit, I'm very hopeful. 15-20% IRRs are possible.
So just one follow-up. Are you expecting an AgriTech unicorn soon?
I hate the word unicorn.
Okay. So
because
sorry.
out of 120 odd unicorn that we have produced, 60 or 70 of them have gone to non-unicorn status.
Okay.
So let's. So as I mentioned that this is one of the sectors where monopolization is impossible. We are going to create a UP unicorn or a Punjab unicorn or whatever you want to call it, and there'll be hundreds and thousands of them. So I think that is the beauty of this sector. A lot of early stage startups ask me, is it too late to get into this sector? I say no. You can build a $100 million business looking at 5 districts in Andhra or doing 2 crops in UP. How does that matter? So I think we'll have many winners. The mortality rate in AgriTech is probably one of the lowest among all the sectors, less than 10%. Grow nahi karte to marte bhi nahi hai. So I think that is the beauty of this sector.
Hello, hi. My name is Shivang, and I work for one of the big tech company. So my question is like, with marginal farmers, there are many initiatives going on, but there's a very less adoption of technology in terms of, for example, the adoption of mobile. Farmers are using mobile, but they are not using for farming, right? They are seeing the content, but it's not they are using it. And government is publishing the data, for example, like what produce we had for like last year, what is the amount of vegetables that are grown in different parts, but they are not using that data. So is there any initiative or do you see like what are the challenges why the farmers are not adopting that technology? Because outcome is like if demand is more, supply is less, you will get better price. But there is a mismatch because it's like previous year something has gone high, all the people are growing that fruit or vegetable. So is there any initiative to educate the farmers or why the adoption is low? Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Most of the technologies, whether it is especially state agriculture universities, even ICAR, there are many technologies available with these universities and these people, but at least even 10% they are not able to go to the end farmer. Probably the main reason is these technologies are developed as a solutions, not as a by through proper understanding of problems of the farmers, because it requires more of interaction, more of dialogue between farmers and the technology developers, scientists, and that process is not evolved in the agriculture ecosystem since beginning. Since beginning. So that is the one issue. Uh, and another thing is that, as already mentioned, central government, state government, that dichotomy is also there. And of course, those private companies are pushing their technologies. Most of the technology, whether it's hybrid varieties or whether it is most of the technologies are already with the private people, private private companies on those technologies also in the market, while this SAU system, state agriculture universities or ICAR, those technologies are not able to go into the farmers. The first step is, as I already mentioned, what are the problems, probe those problems correctly, and build build all the stakeholders focus on that particular problem, regionally identified problem, then come out with solutions. Then only these solutions will be adopted. Otherwise, if you develop solutions in an isolated way and you never impose these solutions on farmers, even soil health card, hardly 10% they are using basically. And as on record, 12 crore farmers they received soil health card, but they don't know it is really the soil health card. They they must have distributed to farmers. They just kept in that birwa, whatever, halmara, something like that. They never know the utility. Somebody has to tell this is the utility of the soil health card. Of course, now AI systems, they may integrate these whole things, agriculture information system awareness, as we have mentioned. This has to be integrated with the AI so that farmers, an illiterate farmer or whatever the standard of literacy and all, can understand properly. These technologies has to reach to the level of the farmer. Many of the times, these technologies, education, awareness levels of these technologies are not reaching to the farmer's level. So, one is understanding the problems, developing solutions in align with co-development of these solutions, and these technologies has to be reached to the level of the farmers. And as we are also, only digital is not sufficient. We are having well structured agriculture officers, block level agriculture officers. Every block, 7,000 blocks are there. Every block is having one agriculture officer, probably one or two below agricultural extension officers. So these are all the backbone, and dealers, input dealers at village level. These are all the backbones. Any technology, if we bypass these backbones, it may not be implemented, that level. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for joining in. I'll also like to thank the panel. Some key summary points that come up is, yes, like in terms of promising technologies, I think remote sensing was quoted very often in the panel. It's something that we need to look forward to. In terms of challenges, two key challenges that came up in adoption of technologies, one was the cost and also the trust deficit between different stakeholders that are there in this ecosystem. And there was a lot of emphasis on making the government a key part of a farmer's agri-tech journey as well. And finally, I think in terms of recommendation, Hemendra ji also laid down a foundational 4 A's. We need to work on building awareness of these technologies, improving accessibility and last mile distribution, improving affordability, and finally making agri-techs aspirational for farmers rather than something that is pushed down in the last mile. So thank you everyone for joining in, and hope you have a great rest of the summit.